And our top focus in Vienna this hour, Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese will be on a 4-day visit to India from the 8th of March. The visit will focus on boosting overall bilateral engagement in a range of areas, including trade, investment and critical minerals. It will be his first visit to India after becoming the Prime Minister in May last year. The government of Australia is looking to diversify trade and foreign investment partners. The business leaders across transport, resources, finance, higher education, architecture and energy will also accompany Albanese to India. Remember, India is Australia's 6th largest trading partner. Australia is the largest supplier of iron ore to China, but is seeking to diversify its customers for critical minerals. Last month, the country blocked a Chinese investment in a rare earth miner on national interest grounds. In a speech at AFR Business Summit in Sydney, Albanese said that India and Australia share a rich history bound by democratic values. He cited a genuine friendship and fierce sporting rivalry as well. Albanese will also watch the 4th Test match of the border-Gavaskar trophy with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi in the city of Ahmedabad. India and Australia are security partners through the Quad, which also includes the United States and Japan. The Quad grouping frequently highlights democracy as a basis for cooperation. China seeks to undermine the rules-based order with a revisionist challenge of the status quo. The Quad efforts are not focused on creating institutions or military alliances. The idea is to generate gradual convergence of cooperation on issues such as climate change, technologies and cybersecurity. For more on this, we are now being joined by Ambassador Navdeep Singh Suri, former High Commissioner of India to Australia. He has served in India's diplomatic missions in Damascus, Washington and London. Welcome to the broadcast, Ambassador.
Pleasure to be with everyone.
Right now, Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese will be visiting India tomorrow. He's on a 4-day visit and this will be his first visit to New Delhi after becoming the Prime Minister of Australia. What will be on the agenda and what will dominate the talks between the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his Australian counterpart?
Well, I really think this is a golden era in India's relations with Australia. Our Foreign Minister, Dr. Jaishankar, has described it as one of our 5 top partners in the world today. And this is a huge change from where we used to be even until a few years ago. If you just look at the first few months of this year, we've had our Minister, Dr. Jaishankar in Australia. The Australian Foreign Minister, Penny Wong, was here recently for the G20 and the Quad Foreign Ministers meeting. The Education Minister and now the Prime Minister. I think what will be on the agenda is really a very wide-ranging menu. There is, of course, the economic side with our economic cooperation and trade agreement. We've done the early harvest or the low-hanging fruit, but I think it's time now that we raised our level of ambition and finalize the more comprehensive agreement. There's always defense to speak about and security because of the China factor. Over the last few months, all of the 3 Australian defense chiefs have visited India. This year's Malabar exercise, the military exercise that brings together India, the United States, Japan and Australia, will for the first time be held in Australia. They will be the hosts. So there's certainly that defense component. We are certainly talking about supply chain resilience, because I think what the pandemic taught us is that the world is overly dependent on China. And while we've been talking about critical minerals and supply chain resilience for a while, I think the real test now is to operationalize them to see whether we can actually, for example, take Australian lithium, process it in India, and reduce our dependence on lithium from China for our electric mobility programs, and so on.
Right. Like you mentioned that there will be a wide-ranging menu, and apart from defense and economic sectors, I also want to add that a high-powered delegation will also be traveling to India with Albanese. A total of 27 business leaders will be accompanying the Australian Prime Minister to India. I want to ask you as to what kind of trade pacts can be expected.
Well, we already have the essential trade pact between India and Australia, which is the Economic Cooperation and Trade Agreement. And I said, the task before both governments is cut out to really finalize the main agreement and expand the scope of this one. But let me say that Australian business has been relatively risk averse when it comes to investing in India as compared to, say, the businesses from the United States or France or UK or others. So I'm very happy that this high-level business delegation is coming from Australia. I think there's huge opportunity. They should realize, the Australian businesses, that India is the growth story for this coming decade. And it's high time that Australian super funds, what are their big pension funds with literally hundreds of billions of dollars of assets, they start investing into Indian assets, as the Canadians have done, as the sovereign funds from UAE have done, for example. I think it's important that they pitch in with that, because this is where the investment opportunities are. And I really feel that there's a lot of potential to expand trade. The India-Australia relationship, in my opinion, is one of those rare relationships where government-to-government relations have expanded faster than business-to-business relations. And it's high time that business catches up with that.
Right. And also, with China turning away from Australian products in recent years, give us a sense of how important India has become for Australia as a marketplace.
Well, as a marketplace, but beyond a marketplace, also as a strategic ally. Yes, of course, the Chinese behaved atrociously with Australia, the kind of arm twisting that they attempted and thought they could get away with, exploiting the fact that 40% of Australian exports were going to China, put pressure on Australia to diversify, and it certainly helped speed up our trade agreement. So yes, Australians are looking for alternate markets for their products. But that's only one part of the story. I think the bigger story is how China has emerged as a security threat in the region. And that is what is prompting this wide-ranging cooperation between middle powers like India and Australia, who are unwilling to accept the diktats emerging from Beijing. They are unwilling to accept China as the regional hegemon, and are willing to collaborate much more closely to counter. The Quad is an example, right? That you have these four countries, India, US, Japan, and Australia, coming together. You don't hear the C word of China, but clearly the intention, whether you are talking about critical minerals or cybersecurity, or indeed about defense and security, the elephant in the room is China. Maybe in a strange sort of way, we have to thank China for energizing these relationships by its provocative behavior.
Right, Mr. Ambassador, like you mentioned that with China appearing as a security threat, in your viewpoint, how do you think China will view this visit by Albanese to India?
Well, they will not react, I think, in any formal way, because, it is a normal visit. It's a normal bilateral relationship that India has with China. And as diplomats, we are sufficiently professional that what we discuss behind closed doors is not put out in any joint statements that give reason for provocation. I think the Australians are also trying to see if they can have a somewhat more normal relationship with China after the situation that developed over the last 3 years. India, of course, again, has been very categorical in saying that our relationship with China is currently abnormal, and that unless China normalizes the situation on the line of control, things might continue to remain this way.
My last question to you, Mr. Ambassador. Tell us more about the soft power diplomacy between India and Australia.
Well, our countries really have a lot in common. Everything from cricket to cultural ties to cuisine to education and much beyond. Australia is a major destination for Indian students. The Indian diaspora in Australia is the fastest growing expatriate community over the last 3 or 4 years, and is broadly being welcomed in Australia. But I'm also encouraged by the fact that Deakin University has announced that under the new liberalized education policy that we have, which allows foreign universities to open campuses in India. Deakin University from Melbourne is going to be the first foreign university to have a campus in Gandhinagar, in the gift city. So that again to me is a very positive development. I would just add that, as an example of soft power diplomacy, the fact that Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Albanese are going to be watching the cricket match, the fourth cricket test is an example. But actually our relationship has gone way beyond cricket. And I think that's the important point to recognize. I used to, during my tenure as High Commissioner, often lament that all we speak about is cricket when there's more substantive issues on the agenda. Well, the sea of cricket today is supplemented by the sea of China, of critical minerals, of cybersecurity, and of cultural ties.